All right, let's bring in Alessio Patalano, who's a professor of war and strategy in East Asia at King's College, and he's joining us from London. Professor Patalano, good to have you with us. So the Quad say they're all based around trade and improving trade between the grouping. Just tell us, is that a realistic position for this grouping to take when obviously they are trying to counter China?
I think we have to understand this summit in light of what has happened last week with the AUKUS agreement, this trilateral security and defence pact between linking Australia, the United Kingdom and the US, which really at heart is about a statement on the importance of how hard security underwrites prosperity. Now, that was an important statement because it puts this particular Quad summit, which is the first one in person, in a slightly different security space. Security is, of course, on one hand, as the pact underlined last week, about the sort of hard elements of power, but then the other component of this is about shaping the future, increasing the resilience of international security and the stability of it. So things like vaccine diplomacy, connectivity, digital, infrastructural, as well as creating the condition for prosperity to be nurtured further are essential. And so this becomes a really interesting space in which discussing about much more about that sort of shaping dimension of international security.
Absolutely right. And I do wonder then, we posed the question in our headlines really asking, is this grouping, again, as you mentioned, it came before, of course, AUKUS, but AUKUS just came last week. So China will be, of course, feeling increasingly pressured by all of these groupings around it. So does it threaten a reaction, do you think, from China?
I think you're absolutely right in terms of pointing out how this is putting China in a different spot. What we're looking at lately, at least the last couple of years, is the comeback of multilateralism and in particular minilaterals, if you want, triple, quadruple type of formations that really are starting to break new ground in the way we approach the complex multiple layers of international security. Now, in all of this, the Indo-Pacific is central to the future of international stability, which raises the question of China. Now, China at the moment is very sort of slow in taking any steps to either join or enter into conversations with these formations. So the fact that they're growing in number and sending all sort of very important signals does really put an important question. It places the balls sort of on the Chinese court. How are you going to engage with them? So what we're looking at is a really interesting few months ahead, really trying to get a sense of how the Chinese are going to respond. My feeling would be that greater engagement and conversation will be an absolute must unless China wants to find itself isolated internationally.
Absolutely, dialogue is the key. And I'm glad you mentioned the next few months, Professor Patalano, because of course one of the key members of this Quad grouping is Japan, and they have got an interesting few months coming up with the replacement of the leader of the Liberal Party coming up. How will the change in leadership in Japan potentially affect what happens in the Quad, if at all?
This is an excellent question, and you're absolutely right. I mean, Japan has been one of the driving engines behind the Quad because of its relationship with all the key members individually, and together with India really brought Quad back in 2017 as at the center of international affairs in that sense. And under the Prime Minister Abe's leadership, Japan has been driving a number of other processes, whether it was a CPTPP, a former TPP-11, Quad, and then the trilateral relations with the United States and Australia, just to speak about the most notable example in the region. So the next election is crucial. Whether we have a strong leader, a person with charisma like Abe, and within the potential candidates, we have Kono Taro, certainly fits that bill. If that sort of person comes around, then we might very well see new energy, new sort of vital propelling fuel coming into these formats, and Japan might very well be sitting at the center of this renewed multilateralism that we spoke about moments ago.
And just finally then, Professor Patalano, every time I get a guest like you with an expertise in Japan, I do have to ask this question about the country's constitution, its pacifist constitution. There's been moves in the past few years. Shinzo Abe really tried to push that forward. It's slowed up slightly. Will a change in leadership perhaps push that forward? And what would that then do to relations with China?
I think you're touching on a very important point. The Constitution, I think at the moment is not a central focal point, because Prime Minister Abe, in many respects, shows that within the framework of the Constitution, there is an important agency role that the government can and should play in its interpretation, stretching, if you want, some of its boundaries. We've seen under Abe how far one could take it. I think depending on the type of leadership that we're going to be looking at, we might see, again, some reinterpretation, if you want, of aspects of it. The key point being, and you're absolutely right, is that link with China. Changing the Constitution is one of those very high thresholds that would significantly change the relationship with China. So the Japanese know this, they understand this, and they're going to be very careful how to manage the type of pressure that they want to exercise with their big neighbor, and above all, their role in the region.
Absolutely right. Okay, Professor Alessio Patalano, Professor of War and Strategy in East Asia at King's College in London. Do appreciate your analysis, sir. Thank you so much for being with us.